Welcome to the Natasha Helfer Podcast. To help keep this podcast going, please consider donating at natashahelfer.com and share this episode. To watch the video of this podcast, you can subscribe to Natasha's channel on YouTube and follow her professional Facebook page at Natasha Helfer, LCMFT, CST-S. You can also find all her cool resources at natashahelfer.com. The information shared on this program is informational and should not be considered therapy. This podcast addresses many topics around mental health and sexuality and may not be suitable for minors. Some topics may elicit a trigger or emotional response, so please care for yourself accordingly. The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed by our guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the views or feelings of Natasha Helfer or the Natasha Helfer Podcast. We provide a platform for open and diverse discussions, and it is important to recognize that different perspectives may be shared. We encourage our listeners to engage in critical thinking and form their own opinions. The intro and outro music for these episodes is by Otter Creek. Thank you for listening. Hello, this is the Natasha Helfer Podcast, where we go after shame anywhere we can get it. And today we're going to go after it in the legislative arena. Super excited to introduce my guest here in a minute. I just want to let people know that if you're interested at Symmetry Counseling, we are currently offering a ethical non-monogamy support group, a mixed orientation marriage support group, and also a religious trauma support group coming up in the next few weeks. So if you're interested in that, by all means, go to our website, simcounseling.com, or contact me somehow through all the social media ways you can do that. We also, I just want to let everybody know, have a faith transition support group that's available every Wednesday night. First nights of the month are in person and also hybrid with online. After that, it's all online. But if that's something that is something you're going through and having challenges with, we would love to help you out. So that's every Wednesday, and it's free with donations accepted for those who can afford to do that. In the meantime, if you enjoy this podcast and want to support it, I also encourage you to donate to the podcast. That helps me keep up all the fees of the video editor and the website and all those things. I'm not really super interested in making tons of money off my podcast, but it would be nice to at least not have to pay the costs of it. So if anybody can support me in that way, that's great. All right, without no further ado, I have with me Sarah Stroup. She is a Utah-based licensed marriage and family therapist. She's a registered play therapist and supervisor who feels privileged to support individuals and families through her group practice, where she specializes in attachment across the lifespan. Her understanding of the local mental health landscape informs her work as the legislative chair for the Utah Association for Marriage and Family Therapy. That's a big job, Sarah, so thank you for doing that for us. And she advocates at the state capitol on a regular basis. Like many, Sarah values time with her family and dogs and enjoys watching soccer in her downtime. And your group practice, if I remember correctly, is that's Monarch Family Counseling.
Yep, that is it.
Want to elevate whatever it is that you've got going on. So
thank you.
That's great. All right. Well, welcome, Sarah. So happy to have you.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Why don't you tell us just a little bit more about yourself? Like, what brings you to MFT land? What brings you to, are you from Utah? What gets you interested in legislation? Just give us a little bit of it.
So I'm a native Utahn, but I'm actually Iranian American. So fun times with that. I grew up in a mixed faith household myself, which was always very interesting, and great food. So that was definitely a bonus.
All right.
Legislatively, it's kind of an interesting story. If you had told me 4 years ago I'd be involved in this, I would have laughed at you. But almost 3 years ago exactly, I was in Disneyland with my family watching Roe versus Wade fall, and I just thought, I can't do this. Like, I have to get involved. I saw the impact it was going to have on the therapy profession. And so I reached out to UMFT. I got on the legislative committee, and 3 years later, I'm the chair. I'm up at the Capitol regularly, rubbing elbows with lawmakers, and it is a lot. It's an interesting roller coaster, but it's always interesting. It's sometimes maddening, but it's fun and really meaningful, in a weird way, in a
Yeah.
very stressful way.
Yeah,
So,
I've played that role. I did it a lot more in Kansas because I spent a huge part of
mm,
my career there, and I was very involved with KMFT, and I went to the Capitol and lobbying. I even, because I was the president of KMFT for a while, I went to national, like
oh yeah.
see, and did lobbying up there for things that usually have to do with mental health or roles of therapists and things like that. So it is exciting. It's sometimes it feels intimidating, and it's also kind of like I think when you're involved in it, it takes a process that feels a little foreign to people. And then you're like, oh, actually, this is just, we talk, we make points, we get to meet people or not if they refuse to meet with us, or whatever those things are.
Yeah. Yeah. So much of it is relationship building, and especially as a therapist, knowing how to like work within the system. And I don't think politics is a natural, maybe comfortable place for a therapist, because we're all about, getting things out in the open, and so much of politics is about who you know and who you're talking to, and are you talking to them at the right time, and
Mhm.
who else is in their ear. So it's kind of this interesting intersection of advocacy and maybe things out therapy isn't. So it's interesting.
Right, because in politics, a lot of times you have an agenda, you want to be clear about what your agenda is. And therapy modalities were more about like trying not to have an agenda and trying to help people have their own agenda. And what are they bringing to the
Yes,
table? So it is a bit of an opposite type of feeling for us, I believe. You
it
mentioned
really is.
you're Iranian American and that you grew up mixed faith. Are you comfortable sharing which faiths you kind of were influenced by in your upbringing?
Yeah, I mean, I've got Mormon pioneer roots with our, well, funeral potatoes. Um, I got like bright red streaks in my hair from my redheaded pioneer ancestors. My one of my kids is my recessive gene baby and has like red hair. And
Oh,
then I had my Iranian Muslim influenced, I'm not sure how much they were really adhering to that family. And so that was also very interesting growing up in Utah in this family, and sometimes the political environment. And I was very aware that my family was a little different. Um, but it was in hindsight, it was such a good experience having this melting pot of faiths and cultures and food and all sorts of things.
yeah, I love it. I love that. So curry, is it curry? I mean, is it
No, no curry, but it's
no
like
curry?
kebab and
Ah,
lots of rice and
mm, yeah.
lots of rose water based desserts if you're
Mm,
into rose water. So
oh,
delicious baklava.
I can just see this like baklava with like green jello salad over here. It's like,
Kind of. There was one Easter where my grandpa tried to get us to have kebabs for Easter dinner, and I was like, my pioneer roots are not gonna let me do that. I'm sorry. Like we have to have funeral potatoes. So
I love it. All right, well, let's dive in. There's a lot of things that we want to try to cover in just an hour. I think that there's a bill that you just gave a presentation at the UAMFT conference, which happened a few months ago. I was not able to go to that because there was another one I was attending, and so this is just part of my selfish, like, I'll ask her to come talk to me on this podcast, and then hopefully I'll get all her cool information. So thank you again for coming.
sure.
But one of the things that I heard you were going to talk about was there seems to be a bill. There's a lot of things that are happening, in my opinion, that have to do with controlling school environments, whether it's the books that are available in the libraries, whether it's what type of history we can teach, whether it's even like sexual orientation and sexual education, which has always been a problem, in my opinion, here in Utah, that there's hardly any comprehensive sexual education offered to students. And so this has to do with now the school counselors and what they are allowed or not allowed to do with their own
Kind of. It's
clients.
school-based therapists.
School-based therapists. Okay, so before I botch it even more, you tell us what it is.
Well, actually, I mean, that was part of the really confusing part of the bill was school counselor versus school therapist. And I can't tell you how many legislators couldn't tell us the difference. They thought it was all the same thing. Um,
Why don't
and I
you
think
go
that
ahead
was,
and educate? Why don't you go ahead and educate the public and tell us what the difference is?
yeah. So school-based therapists are clinical therapists like LCSWs, LMFTs, CMHCs who work inside of schools, and their job is to do therapy, provide therapy services in schools. A school counselor is they have some mental health training, but think of it as more of a guidance counselor, and they can offer therapeutic type services. They can offer crisis resources, things like that, but they can't do therapy. It's a totally separate license. And then we also have school psychologists who can only do psychological testing as it relates to schools. So they couldn't do it like outside unless they were duly licensed. And then we have school-based therapy, school-based social workers, which they may or may not be clinically licensed because they could be licensed through the education system and not through like the clinical licensing through the Department of Professional Licensing. And they also do more like case management stuff, not therapy. So what this bill, so this was Bill HB 281, and it's specifically targeting therapists in schools.
Okay, and how are they targeting therapists?
Well, okay, let me give you a backstory. During the interim session last summer, a handful of the more conservative folks in the House did a book club on the
Mm,
book Bad Therapy by Abigail Schreier, who also wrote, I believe the title is Social Contagion. And her whole thing is that being transgender is a social contagion perpetuated amongst tweens and teens. And in
mhm.
this book, Bad Therapy, she doubled down on that, insinuated that therapists have a political agenda to make kids trans and gay, and that we are overly validating of their feelings, making them weak. We pander to them. We're mischief makers. If you would come to my presentation, I would have given you one of my stickers that says mischief maker, but maybe I'll mail you one.
I would
Um,
actually love that.
I'm gonna own it. I'm a mischief maker, sure. Um, if validating children's feelings makes me a mischief maker, like great. Um, and so they decided they had to do something about us. And I kind of viewed this as a continuation of the session before where they were trying to get therapists out of schools or they were trying to bring in clergy, no, chaplains. And
Mhm.
that bill didn't go anywhere 2 sessions ago. And so it kind of felt in a similar vein of like they just want us out because of this political, they believe we have a political agenda. And so the bill came out and it said that parents got to decide what was allowed to be discussed between a student and a school-based therapist. And that parents could say, you can't talk about certain things, and that the school-based therapist would have to adhere to that. And there were other things too, like parents would have to get a very detailed summary of what was discussed within, I can't remember if in the original bill if it was the same day or the next day. Um, and unsurprisingly, we had many concerns. You know, Utah has some of the highest rates of childhood sexual abuse in the country, but also, unfortunately, not every household is a safe or healthy household. And 90% of people who perpetrate it on kids, like the kids know that adult, they are a trusted adult in the child's life somewhere. And so the idea that a parent who may or may not be safe, and I do believe that the parents who are advocating for this really want the best for their children. But not every parent is safe and not every adult in a child's life is safe. So the idea that a parent could come and say, you won't talk about suicide with my kid, and we would have to abide by that was horrifying. And especially when we have such high rates of suicide too in our state. And so we really pushed back against that and said like that's not okay. And you're going to be increasing victims. We're going to be protecting perpetrators. And we pointed out like that's not best practice. That kind of goes against our code of ethics. And they didn't really care about that. They said, our parenting should always trump your code of ethics, which like it
Mm,
we have a code of ethics for a reason, but I understand that they have
mhm,
concerns.
mhm.
I don't think they're justified in those concerns. by and large, but
Well, that's really, I mean, what we're really dealing with, I think, as a nation on so many topics, is who has the right? Who has the right? Does a vulnerable child have protected rights by our government or not?
um,
Does the parents' right trump the children's right? And this is true for a lot of things, even medical care. If you have certain
yeah,
religious exemptions or certain religious communities who, for example, maybe don't believe in the use of a blood transfusion.
yeah,
And if it's like, well, if the child is going to die because the parent doesn't believe in a blood transfusion, then do we allow that child to die? Or does the parent have a right to enforce their religious ideology on a minor child who I think hopefully we can agree doesn't have the developmental capacity to make that choice for themselves yet.
oh,
And even I think there was a case, was it the man who writes about, I think Steve Hassan is his name, he writes about cults. And there was a case, I think, recently in Massachusetts where all of a sudden one parent became more indoctrinated in a church. And I think they divorced as part of that shift. And now the father was alienating the mother by telling the child, your mother's going to hell because she's not part of this indoctrinated religion. And can parents do that, especially if they're not on the, I mean, we're also assuming the parents are always on the same page, which I think we know quite
mhm,
quite intimately that that is not the case.
yeah,
Parents have different ideas about how they want their children to be raised. And so, does the father have a right to tell his child that his mother is going to hell because she doesn't? I think she was Jewish, and he had turned into some type of Christian. Hassan called it a cult. So, whatever that was. And Massachusetts ruled in favor of the child,
mm,
which I think was really interesting in that case in particular. And I know we have alienation rules, even on
mhm,
the state of Utah, where you're not allowed to alienate a parent
mhm,
in a divorce situation. So this gets messy really quickly, right? And
yep,
and I agree with you. I think most parents have, if we were going to do the common math denominator of what are our values, I think most of us want to protect children.
absolutely,
Um, and yeah, it's so interesting when we have really good evidence and science, which now is also seems to be not very important to a lot of people, that things that we know protect and help children, whether it's sexually, whether it's depression and suicide, whether it's gender minorities and sexual orientation and expression.
mhm.
This is a real kind of almost panic frenzy we're in.
It really is. And we saw that very clearly in the committee meetings where they were discussing this bill. And I have to tell you, like, I have a really thick skin at the legislature because like I understand that they don't really they're not in the trenches like we are in therapy land, right? But I, for the first time in 3 years, left one of those committee meetings almost feeling kind of offended because the way they were talking about therapists and their work with children was, I mean, they vilified us and it was horrendous. And I was just so sad, especially as a children's therapist. I'm like, I just want to love your kids, you know, and I know just like any other profession, there's good therapists and there's bad therapists. But, you know, I'd say as a whole, like we go into this field to help people. And especially for those of us who work with kids, like I just want to love your kids. And so to hear how they were speaking about our intentions was horrifying and just a tiny bit offensive. Like I walked out of there being like, what do you think I do? Like I'm here for your children. So it was really wild to hear their thoughts on what we do and how we interact with kids. And you're right, like the irony is there because there was also a bill that was going to it passed in a version of it, requiring kids to have gun safety education classes as early as kindergarten. And at first, you were not going to be able to opt out, like you had to do it. And then I'm like, wait, like are we parent rights or are we not? And then that got caught up in sex education, and it's like it's so contradictory all the way around.
Mhm. Yeah, it really boils down to parents trying to legislate just whatever they believe, and making that decision for all children and all parents. I mean, that's
Yes.
really what it boils down to.
Yes, and I was reading the comments like on the news stories where people were saying a school counselor, a school therapist like saved my life as a child. Like my home life was not good. And having that person to be able to talk to and be safe with was like made all the difference sometimes. And so the thought that we were going to have children lose that was really scary because not every parent is doing what they're supposed to be doing to protect their child.
Mhm. Well, I
So,
think what's tricky, and I think this might be a difference, is if people feel like they want to protect their children from anything outside of their own belief system.
mhm.
I'm pretty comfortable saying I don't think that's healthy for your child. I don't think that you indoctrinating your child into only your belief system and value system without any ability to have outside um, critical thinking skills or even contemplating other people's ways of life. I mean, I grew up religious and I raised my kids for a long time religiously, but I felt like I was always willing to at least say, well, there's other people that think differently than we do, and you're going to make friends with those people, and we need to respect other people's beliefs. And it seems like there's kind of a stepping away from that kind of, even if I don't have anything against parents sharing their values with their children, but at least being able to do so in a more flexible way where there are other ways of doing life. And that just seems to be really under attack right now.
Yeah, and to your point, I think so much of this is that fear-based. And I think parents see what's happening in our world. Um, and I should look up the research on this because part of me thinks like I don't know if our world is that much worse than it was when we were kids, as much as it is that we have access to instant information all the time, right? About what's happening in other states and other communities. And it's scary and it's an information overload, I think, in a lot of ways. And so I think parents like this are really worried about their child and wanting to just like keep them safe and protected in this world, and it almost goes too far in that how are we developing resiliency and how are we developing their ability to ask for help from other trusted adults? Because it does take that village, right? And our children need more than just us. And like, I want my child to come to me for anything and everything. But if they can't, for whatever reason, I'm unavailable or something's happening at school in that moment, like I want them to have other trusted adults that they can go to. And I recognize that these parents are scared, but our kids need more trusted adults, not fewer.
Yeah. Okay. So, what's the status of this bill?
I am so proud of all of the professional organizations. We put out calls to action. We coordinated really well. Every legislator was complaining about the amount of emails they were getting, and I was like, yes, keep them coming. And so we were able to compromise some on this bill. It did pass. It goes into effect tomorrow, actually. Um, and what it says is that parents can still tell school-based therapists that they don't want a specific topic discussed, but the therapist has the ability to assess if it is possibly going to cause harm or lead to something reportable. So there's some wiggle room in there. And then the school-based therapist has to provide a vague summary of the topic that was discussed within 1 business day. But here's where we ended on an interesting place. This was run through public education law, not licensing laws. And
Mm,
so if you are licensed through the Department of Professional Licensing and you don't abide by this, they won't discipline your license. Now, you can get fired from your job in the school. You could probably have a parent try to civilly sue you, but as far as losing your ability to practice mental health, they created the it's unenforceable in that regard. So if someone is duly licensed through the School Board of Education and DOPL, they're again at a little bit of a higher risk on the licensing side with the school board. But we have enough wiggle room that we're keeping an eye on it.
okay. Okay. So you feel like there's some ability to be flexible within, in essence, like understanding the parent's concern, but also understanding that the therapist has ethical and I think just responsibility to the child and what the child wants to talk about, right? So,
Absolutely. Now, I will give a warning. A similar law was passed in Idaho that not only applies to schools, but also outpatient practices. And we're going to be keeping a really close eye on this next session to make sure that that type of thing does not come to Utah.
wow. So that would be minors in general.
Yeah, and in my opinion, that does start to drift into our scope of practice, and there's so many concerns about that.
Absolutely. Did national associations get involved in this at all?
The American Association for Marriage and Family Therapy did get involved on this and lend their support. They also put out a call to action on our behalf, encouraging members to be keeping an eye on it. Um, and so it was great to have their support from a national level while all of us here on the state level were working really diligently to make sure that our voices were heard.
Yeah, wow. It's just kind of shocking to me how our country just continues to devolve into this space of religious people getting to dictate, the majority religion rule to everybody else. And unfortunately, I mean, I don't say this to be like offensive, but especially more conservative and fundamental religious folks do not have a great track record of protecting children, quite frankly. So when it comes to things like emotional abuse, sexual abuse, even physical abuse, so it's a real interesting time. And I think people need to be very aware. And if you're not agreeing with us, I would encourage you to hopefully be critically thinking of your own role in that. If you are agreeing with us, I'm hoping you're waking up to do legislative action, like call your, people who represent us and to make sure you vote. And remembering that, of course, next year is a big voting year for people in Congress and Senate and all of that. All right, let's move to, you thought that this might not be interesting, but I actually think it's very interesting, which is this kind of whole idea of coaching versus therapy. This has been an interesting thing that I think, again, the public doesn't always have a lot of information around. There are, so I'll just give a little spiel and then you can correct whatever you want to correct that I'm saying. So there are people who are not clinically trained who can take, a course. Usually it's a few weekends or if even that, or they don't have to take anything at all because there's nobody legislating the word coach and they can call themselves a coach, right? And there's people who are like financial coaches or who are career coaches or wellness coaches or lifestyle coaches or whatever, so people who might help you nutritionally, like keep to a diet program you're interested in, but there's definitely been a lot of people that have definitely moved into kind of what we call wellness coaching, which kind of mirrors somewhat what we might do a little bit in therapy. And there's people I think that do good work in this, and I think there's a lot of disasters. And then I think there are also therapists who will also call themselves coaches for different reasons. Even I use a coaching approach. I will offer coaching services, especially if people are calling me from a state I'm not licensed in and needing some faith support because they're leaving their religion. Like, well, that doesn't require therapy. I can give you some strategies, some ideas, and I can offer you that. So I am a licensed clinician and I do some coaching. And then, of course, there's therapists who decide, I don't want to be regulated anymore. I just want to do coaching and, again, are doing good work. And then there's the therapists who lost their license because they were doing something really kind of horrific, usually sexual. And then they call themselves a coach. So there's the coaching umbrella is wide and varied. And I just want to say there's really good people under that umbrella and there's really bad actors under that umbrella. So having said that, what do you want to say then about the legislation around this? And do you agree or not agree with me? You can agree or not agree
Yeah,
with me.
no, I mean, I do. Well, and that's what we talked about in the committee meeting. So this was SB 48. It expanded the scope of mental health practice, but the goal was to capture life coaches in that because life coaches are not regulated. There is no governing body, there is no code of ethics that is agreed upon across the industry. There's no set of agreed upon set of qualifications for it. But in those committee meetings, we did say like there are some amazing life coaches out there, and there are some really sketchy therapists out there, and we are trying to capture the bad actors on both sides. It's not meant to get rid of life coaches. Like there's room for both of us, both professions. But it's meant to curb bad actors on both sides because I was involved in this legislation for over a year, and the amount of life coach websites and then also like bad actor therapists, like I saw both sides of this.
Wow.
Um, so by expanding the scope, they didn't want to regulate life coaches for multiple reasons. One of them being it was going to be incredibly difficult because you have the wellness coaches and the business coaches and financial coaches, and then you have shamans and soul healers, and like it's just huge. It's a huge umbrella. And so by expanding the scope of practice for mental health professionals, they could now go after the sketchy life coaches and then the therapists who turn to life coaching after losing their licenses. Um,
And what
and
does that
then
mean? What does that mean, expanding the scope of practice?
it just added more information about what therapists do and what our scope, what we can do, what we do under the title of mental health therapy. And by doing so, they can go after the people who are working in that scope and send cease and desist citations. Um, Worst case scenario, like for the really, really bad actors, possible criminal charges, things like that. Um, and so that passed, went into effect in May. And here's so for the life coaches who said they were doing like EMDR, like they can't be doing clinical work. Um, and what the state put in that I thought was good was anything that has to deal with interpersonal dysfunction is probably considered therapy. And so we asked them, what is interpersonal dysfunction? Because as therapists, I see so much dysfunction, and I could call it all interpersonal.
What,
Um,
what isn't interfunctional dysfunction?
right. It's all interpersonal dysfunction at the end of the day. Um, but they said anything that would be rooted in like a diagnosis. Like, and so like for let me see if I can give a really good example. So like an executive functioning coach would be fine because the diagnosis isn't based on like it's not interpersonal dysfunction in theory. As a therapist, I could probably argue that. But and they're not the basis of the condition is not rooted. How do I want to say this? This is harder than I thought it would be for non-clinical folks. It's the interpersonal dysfunction is not rooted in a mental illness. So we're not talking about we're really targeting like the people who say they do deep trauma work with no trauma training that and they really should be seeing a therapist for things like that. Um, that's really what they're trying to capture, or the people who are holding themselves as being able to comment or have an opinion on a diagnosis or give a diagnosis. Um, that's kind of what they're trying to capture and curb.
Okay.
We're not eliminating life coaches. We're curbing the drift into mental health territory. And I think to some degree that makes sense because consumers don't always know the difference. I've looked at a lot of life coach websites over the last year and a half, and there are some where the language being used and the clinical jargon, like I don't know how a consumer would know that they're not a licensed mental health professional. And some are great about having disclaimers on their websites. I'm not a mental health professional. This is not a substitute for therapy. But some don't have that at all and hold themselves out to be able to diagnose things or treat things and and use like EMDR.
Or even have opinions about mental health things like discourage certain treatments or medication when that is not their scope of practice at all. That's not even my scope of practice. I cannot tell somebody you shouldn't be on this antidepressant or you should be taking
Mm-hmm.
anxiety medication or big pharma is out to get us all, so stop taking all your meds. I mean, that's malpractice, right? That is not within your scope of practice.
Yeah, and we definitely ran into some of those too. And really, where this came from was, I mean, we made national with Ruby Franke and Jody Hildebrandt, and um, the state decided to do something about that. And so that's where this all stemmed from.
How would this have curtailed Jody Hildebrandt?
That is a great question. So for a period of time, she did lose her license and was still coaching on the side. And so that, in theory, hopefully would have allowed the state to do something about that. Um, and then like Ruby Franke would not have been able to do probably most of what she did either.
Because what was Ruby Franke doing that stepped into diagnosis land?
Well, not even specifically diagnosis. I'd probably put her in the interpersonal dysfunction land that it cannot be touched under this bill now. Doing the whole relationship, quote, porn addiction thing would have been classified as interpersonal dysfunction and having that undertone of a mental illness stemming
Mm-hmm.
from that, if we want to go with the addiction label.
Okay. Will it also stop people from doing faux diagnoses like pornography addiction?
Gosh, that's a whole other probably hour
Okay.
discussion on that. And I mean, we're seeing stuff. Yeah, the pornography addiction is that label is difficult. I'm starting to see more conversion therapy-esque stuff being called gender-related distress, and it's
Mm.
concerning.
Yeah. Well, and I'm concerned that it's even on the websites of actual licensed clinicians that I see
Absolutely.
faux diagnoses. Like I treat these disorders like they're actual diagnoses when they're not even actual diagnoses. So, okay, let's continue to fight for that.
Yeah, that's
Okay. Anything else you want to say about the coaching before I move on?
no, there's room for both professions as long as we're both staying in our lanes.
Yes. Okay. So you had mentioned there's a lot of federal things also that are going to impact, obviously, Utah, and we're seeing a lot of, commentary on this. At least I am on social media and in the news. So let's start with Make America Healthy Again. As I try not to hyperventilate as I say that.
Yeah,
Let me
same.
be very clear. Let me be very clear about what I would like to say about this.
Yeah.
I am not historically one that takes political sides. I myself have voted Republican, have voted Democrat for different people and different times in my life. And I think generally speaking, even when I disagree with people on the other aisle, to me, there seems to have been at least a process in place where we could disagree and legislate what I would say reasonably. I do not believe that that's what's happening right now. And I also believe that life and therapy and science and everything is political. That is my stance. And when I see rights being taken away from the poor, the marginalized, the sexual and gender minorities, women, now my advocacy work is not about, oh, I'm against Republicans or I'm against Democrats. It's no, I'm for health and I'm for wellness and I'm for science. And I'm very comfortable as a therapist saying those things publicly. And if that keeps you from wanting to see me as a therapist, that's your prerogative. That's fine. So when I say Make America Healthy Again, the reason I sigh is because of the extreme amount of falsehoods and misinformation that this campaign has put out there to the public, which I find horrifically not just offensive, harmful. So that's my little soapbox while I let you talk about how is Make America Healthy Again actually going to be the opposite of that for the state of Utah.
Well, and let me be clear too, like so much of what I want to tell you isn't actually rooted in politics as much as it is like this is what is potentially going to be happening within mental health. Um, and it's scary. It's horrifying. it sounds so good on paper, right? Make America healthy again. You're like, yes. And then we do have some of the highest obesity rates. Like on paper, this sounds fine. But when you look into it, it is terrifying, and it's going to have I was going to say wild, but that's not going to be the right word. Like it's going to be a horrifying ripple effect. Um, let's start with what they're looking at. Okay. So they came out and they said, well, we want to examine why, one, we have so many autistic individuals. Um, and RFK said, well, you don't see people in their 70s with autism. It's like, you do, you do. I mean, we could look at Temple Grandin, who's famous and autistic and has done so much in her academia work, right? So, and they're already calling it a disease, which is really concerning. That language is stigmatizing. And if you haven't read it, I really recommend you go and read the actual Make America Healthy Again executive order. Like read it from the White House itself because it outlines exactly what they're looking at, and it is concerning. So the language is really stigmatizing. Autism is not a disease, it's a neurodevelopmental, we could call it a neurotype, right? Um, Also by classifying it as a disease, it has the potential to pull it out of the therapist's scope of practice. So if you have a child or even an adult who is maybe on the spectrum and struggling, we're not sure how we're going to be able like that's one of the things that's up in the air is if it's a disease, are we going to be able to bill for it? Are we going to be able to help if someone comes in and they're like, hey, I want to work on this thing as it relates to my autism, like are we going to be able to? Because we don't treat diseases, we treat mental disorders, which I don't even like calling it a mental disorder, but that's what the manual is called. I didn't title the manual. Um, they also said they want to look at our rates of ADHD, and they want to look at they said the word over dependence on stimulants, SSRIs, so like antidepressants, mood stabilizers, antipsychotics, and then weight loss drugs. And so it's concerning. I think also in that executive order, they alluded that SSRIs are linked to violence in children, which has been disproven. And it's just so stigmatizing. Like there are people who need medication, there are people we need to be on medication. And so there's a lot that's up in the air. And then they doubled down on this in April, where they said, we're going to find the single cause of autism in September, which is so concerning. And he said we think vaccines are a part of this, which has already been debunked. There are other correlations. There's genetic factors. They're finding gestational diabetes might be a factor. Pollution might be a factor. But to really break this down into one cause is really scary to think like that's just not how this works. Also, if it gets classified as a disease, that has the potential to put disability protections up in the air for like kids who are in school, people who might need workplace accommodations. It may not, but it has the potential to. So we're keeping an eye on that and thinking, or even our kids with ADHD who might need 504s or IEPs, like what is going to happen with some of that. So we're really worried about Make America Healthy Again.
Well, and I'm just interested as to when we were healthy. If you really
Yeah.
do, and if you really understand the history of mental health, if you really understand the history of even psychological institutions or psychiatric institutions where people who were on the spectrum or who they were just basically institutionalized and died in institutions, especially if their symptoms were severe enough. Um, where was it healthy, right? Where we have done so much more study and integration, and kids who weren't able to go to school now can go to school. We've got more services in place. I do think we need to be healthier, but not by backtracking, by actually pushing forward even more understanding. I mean, Why was nobody diagnosed with autism 100 years ago? Because nobody knew about it. Nobody understood it. Nobody, yeah, it's kind of just mind alteringly confusing to me how this has been able to be shifted in such a wonky way. And even as you were talking about children in general, like everything, this is something that I was deconstructing even as I was a Mormon woman who basically was, you know, the culture a lot of times with the us versus them, and the world is so dangerous and the world is becoming horrible and it's getting worse. And you look at things like the availability of pornography, or you look at the availability of, or we have more news, so we're more aware of the conflicts around us, like if there's a war in Africa or there in Iran, we're more apt to know about that than we were 100 years ago because we do have more accessibility to information. But all of the statistics, when I really started looking into it, all the statistics are better. We do have less violence in the world, believe it or not. We do have less sexual assault in the world, believe it or not. We have more highly educated people, believe it or not. Like nothing about going backwards is actually better. Like all the numbers actually were worse, including not being safe in kind of war type times and things of that nature. So when people are like, again, like when point that out, where's the research that everything was so wonderful and people were just dumber and more ignorant to issues. So yes, now we have more awareness. We have more awareness. That's stressful to be more aware of the things that are difficult and that are not going as well. But it doesn't mean that those things were not very alive and well in the past, and even worse.
Yeah, no, some of us have been joking, like, okay, well, you think autism didn't exist like 50, 60 years ago? Like, who had a grandpa who collected like bits of string and organized them according to size? And, who had a grandma who was like hyper focused on like collecting those little spoons? And I'm not saying that automatically makes you autistic, but my point is, you know, you look back at previous generations and you're like, I
Mm-hmm.
kind of wonder some things sometimes? And so it's part of our evolutionary system. Like there's just different neurotypes. And so we're not, and to your point, like they were institutionalized, right? And it wasn't that many decades ago that we were still institutionalizing women during menopause and calling them hysterical. Like we can't go back, and Make America Healthy Again feels like we are going back and we're stigmatizing, and like yes, this is going to impact adults, but like children, like we're back to stigmatizing children.
That's the most vulnerable. I mean, parents who want to protect their children by keeping them away from the world, I'm sorry, just turn into fundamentalist parents. And we know what the fundamental communities are like. And I'm sorry, those are just not healthy communities, according to how I define health. And I think that there's a real ethical dilemma that we have. Are we going to protect parents who are adults and who do have their brains developed, or are we going to protect children? And it's interesting that in all, the advanced countries in the world, there's actually many more protections for children than there are for the parents. And like parents, you can manage, you can hang, you can take care of yourselves. Your kids
Um,
can't hang with your indoctrination, and that's going to affect them in ways. It's going to take them years of therapy, because I've sat with those kids that are then adults to try to deconstruct some of the damage. So all this protection is actually less protective, which means that parents have to deal with their own anxieties. And when they can't deal with their own anxieties, well, that's an adult problem. That's an adult problem that's getting projected to the
yeah.
children. So yeah, I'm just going to be very clear. Like parents, like you got to do your work. You got to do your resilience work. Pretending that you're going to protect kids by giving them less information is actually the opposite of protecting them.
Well, and here's where I do think the federal government has politically misstepped. Okay. In working with neurodivergent children, I will tell you, hell hath no fury like the parent of a disabled child advocating for their needs to be met. And
Mm-hmm.
so we're seeing parents riled up on both sides of the political spectrum saying, no, 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 like we're like, my
Mm-hmm.
child does go on dates and they do, they're 17 and paying taxes. Like, And oh my gosh, they do use the toilet because that was another thing RFK said. They said they can't use the toilet, and we've done this to our children, right? Like they're mad. They're mad. And these are parents who are exhausted, who are advocating for their child in every possible avenue, and they will be heard. I mean, they got pretty loud in April when RFK doubled down on this, and when they started announcing things in September, I have no doubt that mental health therapists, children advocates, and these parents of these children who need services are going to find themselves in alignment, and we will be loud.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. Because parents kind of fall into two camps for me. Parents are oftentimes like not understanding their kids' real needs and so desperately trying to get them to fit into some norm that they're actually ignoring their kids, which oftentimes happens, especially with trans kids and sexual minorities of religiously conservative parents who just want to pretend it's not a real thing. And then you have parents who are like the mama dragons, papa dragon. I mean, that's dragon is a very cool metaphor, right? Because
Mhm.
like we're going to come out the mama bears, the papa bears, you know, all these animals that are symbolized like I will protect my child. And I know both feel like they're protecting their child, but this is where it's so important for parents to actually educate themselves on what it means to protect your child's autonomy and your child's ability to be their own person versus just a projection of yourself. All right, we have two more topics I want to definitely get to. So
Okay.
Medicaid cuts,
Oh man, Natasha.
which by the way, they ran promising they wouldn't do, right? So this is, I mean, I don't understand how people don't see that there just has been. I mean, I know there's always dishonesty in politics. That's true of both sides. I understand that. But this is like a whole nother level of just flat out lying that I've never seen before. And that I don't know why we don't regulate that more. Like it was interesting for me to see that Canada has regulation that you can't journalistically just place falsehoods in the news of Canada. But
Oh, that's interesting.
for some reason, well, and Fox News got, I can't even handle calling them Fox News. Fox Entertainment Media got, they did lose a huge multi-million, I don't know if million or billion or whatever lawsuit because they're falsehoods. I mean,
Mm.
we do have some protection in the rules of slander in our country, but I think the public has a really difficult time right now understanding what is just a falsehood, just a flat out lie, because we're just allowing it. They ran saying they would not cut Medicaid, and now they are. If this bill passes, the big, beautiful, ridiculous bill that they're talking about passes, there will be significant cuts to Medicaid.
Huge. And again, this is one of those things. Okay, I'm checking my phone's been buzzing, and I've been following the big beautiful bill that is happening. So I'm like making sure there's no breaking news on that right now. My comments on this again are less about left versus right and more like this is the reality of what's coming our way. And I will tell you, I've been sitting in meetings on this on the state level, and the word they're using is decimate. This will decimate our medical and mental health systems, and for our conservative legislature to be saying that, like, there is concern here. The federal government contributes X amount of dollars, a percentage. And like it's really convoluted too. And it's changing a lot as the bill bounces back and forth between the houses on the federal level. But they contribute a percentage to the state Medicaid program. And in Utah, we have a trigger law that if that changes even by 1%, it will sunset Medicaid expansion in Utah January 1st, July 1st, after this goes into effect. So thankfully, tomorrow's July 1st, and the effective date I'm hearing is at least 2 to 3 years from now. So we have a little bit of time to try to figure this out. But Utah is going to be short billions of dollars because that trigger law will go into effect. So many people are going to lose coverage. Most of our behavioral health system like Medicaid's our biggest payer in the state of Utah for behavioral health. And so it's going to really impact a lot of people. It's going to impact a lot of payers, providers, um, and then it's going to have trickle down impacts for consumers as well. So if you think about someone who doesn't have insurance and they get a toothache, they'll just deal with it and deal with it and deal with it until they can't bear it anymore. And then where do they go?
The ER.
They go to the ER. And then if they can't pay that bill, because they probably can't, at some point, what the hospital has to raise their costs or they have to recoup those fees in other ways. And so um, hospital visits will likely cost more. We're likely to see higher premiums, higher copays, higher deductibles because they have to recoup their money somewhere.
Which
And
are
so
already astronomically high.
it's
When people
already high.
in this country talk about, oh, we don't want to raise taxes, but we are all paying thousands of dollars in premiums for insurance for families that then on top of it don't even pay much. You have like a $10,000 deductible. So you're paying $1,000, maybe $500 to $1,500 every month. And then on top of that, you've got to meet a 10,000 to 20,000 deductible. We're not being taxed. I'm like, you don't understand that you're being highly taxed?
It's wild. And then I mean, Utah's going to have to find this money, and it's like and Utah is far more independent from the federal government than most other states financially. So, like, if we're going to be in trouble, I can only imagine what other states who are not as financially independent are going to face. So then, though, they've now they in this big beautiful bill it says unless you're a citizen, you can't have Medicaid. So it doesn't matter if you're here legally through like a green card or a visa or you're an asylum seeker, you won't be eligible for Medicaid. It also has uh, some other things where CHIP, the Children's Health Insurance Plan, is on the line as well. If not from the big beautiful bill, also though from like a funding perspective, like Utah's going to have to find money to make up for the deficit that we're going to experience from the federal government. Um, so then you're going to have people who can't afford vaccinations and preventative care. And then we're going to have more unvaccinated, particularly like children in schools who have the potential to spread um, preventable diseases. And so that's concerning as well. Um, there's also a whole bunch of stuff that's related to tax cuts that will impact like SNAP benefits. We're going to see more food insecurity and the child care credit that covers childcare for low-income families so they can go to work. It's going to have, and those are set to go into effect much quicker than the Medicaid stuff. So it's it's really going to impact all of our communities. And they're saying like they're trying to target fraud. And I understand, cutting back fraud sounds good for everyone, right? But when you look at the cost benefit analysis of this, what they might be preventing in fraud, I'm going to use that term loosely,
The
is going
fraud,
to have,
it's fake. I mean, if we're going to talk about fake news, this is fake news. I mean, there's always going to be some issue with fraud. The percentage of that has never been astronomical, and there are definitely things we can do. We already go after therapists and doctors and hospitals for insurance fraud. It's very unlikely. I don't know one person in my entire career who basically got, you know, blasted with insurance fraud. I do know therapists who got blasted for having sex with their clients. That's actually a much higher percentage than insurance
okay.
fraud. So to try to fix this fake fraud problem by just cutting benefits, I mean, it's so fascinating to me because, I'm also a um, I guess, cultural family. My mother's from Argentina. And one thing that really bothered her is that Americans like love to talk about third world countries, like they're just so beneath them. And I can guarantee you, I mean, just Mexico, Argentina, Chile, all these South American countries have much more robust health care and take care of their poor and sick than the United States of America. So I don't know why we think we're so great. And I don't know why we think we're doing things that are so great when basically we're already doing poorly and taking care of our poor. And now we're just going to do worse. Do people just want people to just not get health benefits? Do people just want to be like, oh, sorry, yeah, you are going to die. You don't have the money? Because that's
Well,
pretty much where we're headed.
And it kind of is. And I've heard, unfortunately, I've like heard some comments like that, and especially in regards to like immigrants. And usually it's the keyboard warriors. No one I know personally, thank goodness. Again, like this is going to impact all consumers. And you're like, well, I'm not on Medicaid. Or if you're a therapist who's like, I don't take Medicaid, like it will still impact us. You're gonna, again, with those higher premiums, higher copays, higher deductibles, it's gonna put more barriers to accessibility for even outpatient clients. A lot of insurance companies base their reimbursement rates off of Medicaid. And so they'll say, oh, we'll give you 90% of CMS, whatever. And if those rates start dropping, we could see private insurance is also dropping their reimbursement rates. Like it's going to be, we're all going to feel it. And even then, Utah has to come up with the money to help keep some of these programs in place. Where are we going to find that money?
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Last topic, AI regulation. So if anybody has been talking to their college students who are going to go to college and say, oh, by the way, you probably shouldn't just use ChatGPT to write all your papers for you. We are now having a lot of AI help. And I'm not going to lie, I think it's very helpful, like to help us kind of create notes or treatment plans and create language that's just goes a lot quicker when you can say, hey, ChatGPT, help me with this, note I need to make for my session. So what have been the concerns about that, and why is AI problematic when it comes to issues like confidentiality and like HIPAA information? So let's help educate the public a little bit on that.
Oh my goodness, I mean, I have a whole 4 hour training on therapists on just that topic alone, because there's so much there. But um, I guess and there's so much there. Oh my gosh. Okay. Let's go back to legislation in Utah. Utah was the first state to regulate AI mental health chatbots in the country. Um, Again, I was UMFT. We were really involved in that legislation. We worked really closely with the Office of AI, and we felt really good about it. And what came out of that, and hopefully the big beautiful bill does not undo that, because they're trying to sneak a little thing in there that says you can't regulate AI for 10 years. And I'm really hoping that they've been debating that part. I hope that doesn't stay. But that bill says that if you are engaging a mental health chatbot, it has to disclose to you that it is an AI chatbot. And that every X amount of days or every time you log in, it has to also remind you, so that hopefully you don't get confused that there were instances of like there's that 14-year-old boy who fell in love with a AI chatbot of his favorite anime character, and who told him to end his life, and he did. And so by reminding consumers that this is an AI chatbot, we're hoping to
So are you saying that like some of these platforms where people can chat with a therapist, they're actually not chatting with a therapist, they're chatting with an AI chat bot? Is that what you're
correct.
trying to say?
hmm Yeah, and when we look at AI chatbots in mental health, they can range from highly structured, like a CBT workbook in the form of an AI chatbot kind of thing, to there's one company that says they do couples counseling through their mental health AI chatbot, which I really want to know more about it, but then they charge and I didn't want to pay for it. But I have questions about that.
Mhm.
Um, and so that was one of the things in the bill. The other one says that they can't sell your information anywhere in the process. 49 out of 50 telemedical companies in a recent survey were found to have violated HIPAA. And the way they were trying to justify it was, well, we were selling the customer data that they gave us when they signed up before they engaged in PHI, to which we said, we don't care. Like it's all protected. Like it's all like it's PHI. You can't do that. And so they can't sell the data. We also had heard of
Sorry, PHI is
going.
personal health
Oh,
information.
yes.
I'm just trying
Sorry.
to make sure we're talking to so people
Yes, thank you. Too much of my therapy acronyms coming out. Thanks,
know. I
Natasha. Privacy, like we want people to have, like, privacy is important. If we're required to follow HIPAA standards, like you can't sell customer data and call it
HIPAA.
not. Yeah. Um, We had also heard of AI mental health chatbots engaging with people like with eating disorders, and then their information was sold and they got third party target marketing for like diet pills. So this bill says they can't do that. Um, so we were really happy with that bill. We felt like it was good. It did offer some protections for AI companies if they follow the rules, which felt fair. Like AI can hallucinate, it can make things up. And so if companies are committed to being aware of and fixing it, then that felt like a fair compromise. But we were really happy that we were the first state to regulate that in the country, and we've seen there's a couple other states who are following in our footsteps on that. But we wanted to make sure that if someone did make that choice, that they knew it was not a human and that their health information was protected.
Okay. Is there anything that we need to be aware of as therapists? Like, for example, if I want to say, hey, Chat GPT, I saw this couple and they're struggling with kind of these basic issues. I'm not sharing PHI, right? I'm not saying who their names are or what
But
their,
are you?
well, let's talk about that.
Let's talk about that.
Mhm.
Um, ChatGPT was so proud. This was like 3, 4 weeks ago, saying, "We will now remember all of your conversations, and we will grow with you." And they made it sound like it was this like awesome thing, and I'm like, that's concerning. I don't like that. So let's take that into consideration for a second. If I'm a therapist and let's say I put into Chat GPT, hey, I need a treatment plan for like a man in his late 30s who is struggling with job satisfaction, exhibiting some of these symptoms that are, let's say, like just basic anxiety symptoms. Okay. Then let's say like 3 weeks later, I'm like, hey, I need treatment ideas for a man in his late 30s struggling with job satisfaction who is thinking too much during his 40-minute commute. And then let's say like 3 weeks later, you start talking about, hey, I need ideas for a client who works in as maybe a software developer who's struggling with like job satisfaction or whatever. Okay. It is reasonable-ish. That was a very broad example, but it is reasonable-ish to say that if AI scours the internet, that they could find a man who might come to your office who has like a 40-ish minute commute, who's a software developer, and like scour LinkedIn, Facebook, things like this. Like the more ambiguous information you put in, it doesn't mean that it can't connect it over time. And now you have potentially identified your client, or your AI has been able to identify your client, and you may never know. So I think that's something to take into consideration. There are HIPAA compliant AI services like Gemini. If you have a um, business suite through Google, you can get a HIPAA compliant version of Gemini. But I like to make my colleagues recite with me like ChatGPT is not HIPAA compliant. There are some exceptions to that, but 99% of them do, like, they really don't apply to
And there's
therapists.
nothing currently legislating that we have to use HIPAA compliant chat GPT versions. That's not being legislated.
If there was Nevada just passed a bill actually that was similar to that.
Okay.
And I noted that, and I'm waiting to see what happens with the big beautiful bill to see if we need to have further discussions on implementing something similar to what Nevada has done. But I would say overarchingly though, like we're mandated to follow HIPAA, and so if we are putting in enough information that it can be identified at some point, then we shouldn't do it. Now, if it's like, hey, what are the basic tenets of this therapeutic theory, or what are the best treatment options for a client who is diagnosed with this diagnosis? And we're keeping it really big picture and broad, then sure. I mean, I would still prefer like a HIPAA compliant
Mhm.
AI chatbot helper, but I think we got to be really, really careful about the innocuous information we put into AI and how that can still be identified.
Yeah, so a good question for the public might, if you're going to see a therapist or even a coach, to just say, do you use ChatGPT at all to create the documentation for my case? And not necessarily that that's bad if they say yes, but okay, are you using a HIPAA compliant platform or something along those lines would be a way to protect.
Well, Yes, but I would also say, and for any of my fellow colleagues who are listening, um, the Department of Commerce put out a best practice handbook for the use of AI in mental health, and every clinician should read it. You can Google it, you can look at the UMFT social media. I posted it a few weeks ago, and it outlines exactly what their expectations are for us to ethically use AI. And then if there is someone who files a complaint against a therapist for the unethical use of AI, they will be using that best practice handbook to guide their decision making in the disciplinary process. And in that handbook, and it's 40 pages, but I promise you there's a lot of bullet points in big font, like we have to read it. It talks about how we have to have informed consent before using AI with our clients, even for documentation purposes. If it's like, general administrative purposes kind of thing, then we don't. But if we're doing anything with their data, they have to sign an additional form for informed consent. We have to notify them. So
Okay.
if your therapist is using AI, you should already be aware of it. If not, I think it's still good to ask and then give them a chance to give you an informed consent to sign.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that reaches the end of my questions for now. I know we could have gotten into trans health issues. Those are not necessarily on the docket right now. They already passed last year in really catastrophic way for trans youth. And I
I
know
will say,
that's
for those paying attention, the conversion therapy ban for minors is going to be it's going to be heard in the Supreme Court starting in October. And we will also be closely following that because Utah has its own state ban. But this is out of Colorado, but it'll be heard in the federal Supreme Court.
because right now it's only been legislated illegal in like about half of the states, or maybe a little bit more than half of the states.
Yeah, I'd have to go back and look. Ours passed in 2003.
Which I also think is kind of a joke. I mean, I'm glad we're protecting minors, but the reality here in Utah that I'm very aware of is that many people receiving conversion therapy are 18, 19, 20-year-old emerging adults who are either going to BYU or who have religiously conservative backgrounds. And so this idea that we only protect minors when it is a faux ineffective, not just ineffective, but actually harmful treatment, just gets me into into like ragey type of feelings that this is still allowed, right? That people are allowed to believe that they have a disorder that is not clinically supported and that there is treatment that actually causes trauma instead of helps. So that just, I have no patience for that.
It's unfortunately alive and well in Utah, and it's disappointing to see, especially when, and I do want to let me just clearly and plainly state this, okay? Whatever the Supreme Court says, and Utah, the state of Utah, still has a conversion therapy ban for minors in effect, but whether it's a minor or not, all of the therapy national organizations came out and said it is unethical to do, period.
And I believe that even if, which I think does involve doppel, correct? So if you are receiving conversion therapy as a 19-year-old and now you're 25 and you're like, what the heck happened to me? Please know that you can report your therapist to the Department of Professional Licensing, which is doppel, DOPL, and place a complaint because we can lose our license for ethical issues, not just legal issues. So please know your rights as a consumer of bad therapy.
We are tasked with,
Actual bad therapy, not
yes, not
Abigail
that book. And
Spire bad therapy.
don't give her your money to read it. Don't do it.
Oh, okay.
But
Gosh.
yeah, we're tasked with doing no harm,
Mhm.
and sometimes that gets tricky in therapy land. Like if I call you out on stuff, like, are you offended or did I cause harm? Right. But like when we're looking at ethics and causing harm, like especially something like conversion therapy, like you can report it.
Well, the difference would be that there's science to back it up and not just one study and not just one stupid book with no actual scientific evidence around it. So we as associations, I mean, this is why ASECT has come out very strongly against porn addiction and sex addiction language. This is why all associations have come out against conversion therapy. Well, Sarah, is there anything else you want to cover or anything I didn't ask that you were excited to talk to me about?
Oh man, I could talk about legislation forever. I told you that. No, like keep an eye on the big beautiful bill, like get involved. Like Natasha said, vote, but also make sure that you're writing to your local representatives, whether it's within the state or federal level. Um, you
Can you
might,
can you share really quickly like where people can go to find who their legislators are or
yeah. If you can Google find my representative and that will take you to Utah's. You can type in your address and it'll tell you who your House representative is and who your representative senator is. And then you can do the same thing, find my representatives federal, and it'll take you to a website where again you put in your address and it'll tell you who to reach out to. Um, and you might get lip service back. That's okay. The more voices they hear, the bigger impact that has. So again, with that school-based therapy bill, they were all talking about how many emails and phone calls they were getting, and it had an impact. And so use your voice, even if you feel like they're not going to listen, even if you feel like they're going to disagree, at some point, like the amount of voices that they hear, it matters.
it really does. That's the only way that we have power is in the power of numbers. That's really the only
Absolutely.
way to have change happen. When you look at history, that's the only way history changes. That's the only way, especially minorities and people who are marginalized have rights. It is never top down. Never. Not once in history have I known of a story where top, powerful, rich people gave rights to people who were not as privileged. And that's why we've had a history of revolutions, and hopefully it doesn't come to that. So we hopefully have a system in place, which I believe in strongly, is our Constitution and the checks and balances system. And it is in numbers. So it is exciting to see how many people are, I think, on both sides of the aisle, because to me, again, this is not a Republican or Democrat issue. I think that there's wonderful Republicans and wonderful Democrats and independents and libertarians, but this is something else is happening here. And I think it's important for us as psychologists to say this is different. This is kind of cult-like. There's lots of actually professionals talking about that. And you have to be really careful to not allow a political system to just completely disarm all the different voices that are important to listen to at all times. So I think that's what you're about, Sarah. I think that's what I'm about. It's not about one system, one political. It could have happened in the Democratic system too. So it's just,
Absolutely.
it really is more about the checks and balances and constitutional rights. So,
And about people. I've been saying that too. This is about people.
yeah, and that we all matter. And I think it can be really hard and disheartening and tiring, and people just give up hope. And then they don't show up, they don't call, they don't vote. And that's probably the most dangerous thing. Right now, every voice matters. So thank you so much for your time, Sarah. This is
Thank you.
it was very helpful for me to at least some things I learned and some things was really good review. So I appreciate your time with us today.
Thanks for having me.
Take care. Bye-bye.
You too. Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Natasha Helfer Podcast. To help keep this podcast going, please consider donating at natashahelfer.com and share this episode. To watch the video of this podcast, you can subscribe to Natasha's channel on YouTube and follow her professional Facebook page at Natasha Helfer, LCMFT, CST-S. You can also find all her cool resources at natashahelfer.com. The information shared on this program is informational and should not be considered therapy. This podcast addresses many topics around mental health and sexuality and may not be suitable for minors. Some topics may elicit a trigger or emotional response, so please care for yourself accordingly. The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed by our guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the views or feelings of Natasha Helfer or the Natasha Helfer Podcast. We provide a platform for open and diverse discussions, and it is important to recognize that different perspectives may be shared. We encourage our listeners to engage in critical thinking and form their own opinions. The intro and outro music for these episodes is by Otter Creek. Thank you for listening.
is a place where time slows to nature's pace, and there is space there to find yourself in her embrace. Some places should be left alone. So we can always go to the homeland of the heart. Etched on her canyon walls, alongside Earth's mysteries. Some places should be left alone. So we can always go to the homeland of the heart, to the homeland of the heart. Deep in our cities, we sleep without her stars, yet still her presence sustains us from afar. Some places should be left alone. So we can always go to the homeland of the heart, to the homeland of the heart, to the homeland of the heart.